So as I said, I'll start off by telling you a little bit about the Speak Up Research Project. We have a mixed audience here in terms of folks I know that already know a little bit about Speak Up or a lot, but some folks may be brand new. So we'll take you through that. We're then going to talk about some of the current realities regarding the use of technology within learning, regarding digital learning. And that's obviously an impact of the pandemic and the sudden shift to remote learning. Then we'll talk about some education leadership priorities. And then the key part of our conversation today is to connect the dots. So how can Speak Up help you with those priorities that you have within your schools, within your district, possibly within your state? I've got my recommended list of next steps for you, as well as some additional resources. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. Opportunity to hear your comments, your ideas, or things that might be that you need some further clarification or some additional information. I want to make sure I'm setting expectations appropriately. I'm not going to share with you everything you need to know about Speak Up today. I'm going to give you a little bit of information, and then hopefully we can have some follow-on conversations as well. So in case you're not familiar with Project Tomorrow, we are an education nonprofit group. We've been supporting K-12 education since 1996. Now, our mission has changed over that time period. Today, we are very much focused in on making sure that our school and district leaders have the capacities, the competencies, the tools that they need to really be able to make the very best decisions for their educational mission. We believe very strongly in the power of transformational teaching and learning, and we focus on the role of research, in particular, around new learning models, very specifically digital learning. So the Speak Up Research Project is what we're here to talk about today. It also is our landmark research initiative within Project Tomorrow. So we think about Speak Up as a leadership support tool for school and district decision makers. What we do every year is we develop a suite of normed online surveys to collect authentic feedback from key stakeholders, K-12 students, teachers, parents, administrators. We make those online surveys available to any K-12 school or district that would like to use them to collect feedback from your stakeholders. This is 100% a free service that we provide to K-12 schools and districts. And we facilitate all of the back-end processing of the data for you and give you back your summary reports that include not only 100% of your locally collected data, but also state and national data for benchmarks as well. We've been doing the Speak Up Research Project since 2003. In addition to it being a service for K-12 school and district leaders, we also take the national data and every year share that not only with Congress and different federal agencies that are involved with education programs and funding, but also the research community, the policy community, and also the business community as well. Okay, so let's get real, folks, about some of the realities associated today with digital learning. So I've got a couple perspectives here based on our research that we've been looking at and the insights that we've been able to glean from that research. A lot of these, I think, are going to resonate with all of you as well. So our entire education ecosystems are more dependent upon technology today than ever before, not only in the classroom, but also in our back-end processing, in our district or central office, in terms of our communications with our communities. In many ways, the job, though, of technology specifically within teaching and learning has changed. Prior to the pandemic, technology was quite often used to help engage students in your learning or to provide them with access to different types of resources. Obviously, we saw during the sudden shift to remote learning that has continued in many communities, that technology now has become the learning platform. And that change in the job, that change in the responsibilities has also impacted the realities around digital learning today. We also know that the views of our different stakeholders differ, not only in terms of the value of technology within learning, but what they see as the best use cases. Too often, and I know that this will resonate with all of you, however, we feel the need, quite often we feel the need to respond to that loudest voice about what would be the best use cases or the value of technology. But of course, it begs the question whether that represents the majority of our viewpoints of our stakeholders. Now, we've also seen, particularly over the last couple of years, lots of experimentation with new learning models. Now, some of that predated the pandemic, of course. We were talking about blended learning and flipped learning prior to that, project-based learning also. But we've seen a lot more of that continuing. But I will tell you that based on the research that we've done through Speak Up, as well as our efficacy and evaluation studies that we do every year for school districts, for the most part, we're still not using technology as effectively as we could to support student learning, particularly around personalization. Now, whereas there's lots of different ways to gain feedback from your stakeholders, we all know how to create a Google form or a Survey Monkey, and lots of districts have been doing those type of things to get some input. We actually are less skilled as a community in terms of how to translate the views of those stakeholders to really impact plans, decisions, and most notably communications back out to our community. So we need some more work in that. We still believe that stakeholder perspectives can be a very valuable asset if collected effectively, if used appropriately. Now, we know that with all of the new funding that is available to K-12 schools and districts, there's even a greater imperative to make sure that we're using those funds appropriately, particularly to address the realities around the types of priorities that exist today. And in fact, we believe those stakes are higher than they've ever been before. And I know that all of you are feeling that as well. So we believe that from a digital learning standpoint, we're actually at a very pivotal point, sort of an inflection point in terms of what the possibilities could be of fully realizing the potential of technology to transform teaching and learning. But we can't use the same old playbook that we've used for years. And that's where I think that Speak Up more than ever before can help school and district leaders such as yourself understand how to be able to translate the asset of stakeholder feedback into actionable knowledge. So let's get into that part of our conversation today. But I want to start off with asking you a question. Now, every year on the Speak Up surveys, we ask school and district leaders what wakes you up in the middle of the night as a statement of their priorities. What's top of mind for them? What are they most concerned about? I would love to hear what your perspective is on this right now. What's waking you up in the middle of the night in terms of thinking about your education needs, your education mission, your students, your teachers, your community? So take a second, folks, and share with us what are your wake up issues right now. And you can use just the chat box for doing that. So take a look at that question and let's see what folks have in terms of their perspectives. So give it a little bit of thought and then go ahead and throw your responses into the chat box if you could. In the meantime, I'm going to move ahead and share with you what we're finding from our national Speak Up data. So as I mentioned, every year we query our school and district leaders about the same question. So what's waking you up in the middle of the night? So I thought it would be interesting for you to see what we're hearing from the national data. Now, of course, your mileage may differ in your schools and districts and in your communities, but it gives us a place to resonate here a little bit with each other. So here's what we heard most recently from superintendents and district leaders. Number one, student learning loss and recovery, acceleration, whatever that might be. I see that Stephen in our group has indicated that as well. This idea of staff morale and motivation, what's happening with our staff, our teaching staff, our administrative staff, our certified or our classified staff as well. We also know that the mental and emotional supports for students, how has the pandemic impacted them? And what do we need to do to make sure that they're in the right place going forward? This idea of the effective use of technology. Are we using technology effectively? What do we need to do to use it more effectively? And what does that mean in terms of our future going forward? And then finally, this idea of adequate funding, not just funding for today, but the sustainability of that funding. So as we make decisions, particularly with the CARES or ESSER funding, what does that mean in terms of the future sustainability of that? So this is a very interesting list, and I see a lot of this echoed in the comments that came up here from our group that's with us today. So what I want to do now is help you connect those dots, really to understand how, if these are your priorities or the priorities that you identified as well, what does that mean in terms of using the Speak Up surveys to gain the type of information you need to support you as you address these wake up issues? So we really look at it that this connecting of the dots and using the Speak Up tools can help you in three specific areas. One, to provide valid, normed, trusted data that represents your entire community, all of the different audiences, your students conceptually, your teachers, your parents, your administrators. Now, participating in Speak Up, though, you choose which audiences you want to poll. That's totally up to you. We make all those tools available to you, but you make the final decision as to what you want to use. The idea that the Speak Up reports offer you not only your own local data from your stakeholders, but comparative data. I mentioned a couple of moments ago. When we give you back your Speak Up data, it includes state comparative data and national comparative data. Now, again, any of us can put up a Google form, any of us could put up a Survey Monkey, but you're looking at it only within your organizational view. The comparative data provides you with highly valuable context. Are the views of my stakeholders the same as what we're seeing statewide or nationally? And of course, from a district perspective, the data comes back to you as a district leader, not only looking at your district aggregate data, but comparable by school as well. So you can actually look at all of that data through multiple different lenses. And then the third part I think is really important. A key element coming out of the pandemic has been this idea of increased transparency about what's happening in our classrooms, and also the idea that in particular, our parents want to have increased engagement with their child's school and district, and particularly to have a greater understanding of what's happening in their child's learning lives. We have lots of data to support that as well. So this idea that using the Speak Up tools from a non-biased third party actually helps you create a new culture within your school or district about the value of the voices of your stakeholders, but also how you can translate that data into actionable knowledge, really addressing those priorities. So let me give you just a quick look at some of those priorities and the different audiences that can be addressed by looking at the Speak Up questions. Now, I encourage all of you to take a look at the Speak Up surveys directly, and you can look at all of our questions. You can see exactly what we're asking. I'm always happy to have further conversations about that. Why did you ask the question this way? What is the idea and the intent here? Where is this coming from? But I also wanted to give you sort of the overview here, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So for example, if one of your priorities was this idea of student learning loss, recovery, acceleration, maybe what are the learning preferences? What are the preferences around communications? Please know that there are questions on the Speak Up surveys that address that across the 4 key audiences: K-12 students, parents, teachers, and also your school site administrators. If your questions are more about the effectiveness of technology or the effectiveness of the instructional materials that are being used currently, what are the benefits and outcomes of those? Again, all 4 audiences are actually polled through the Speak Up surveys about this. Now, this is really interesting to note because as a result of the way that we do this, you get comparative data also on the same questions. So are your teachers saying the same things as your school principals? Are parents saying the same things or having the same values and views as your school leaders? So there's all sorts of different ways of looking at this data. What I'd like to do now is take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these questions and give you a little bit more insights about how you can use this. So we'll start off with this one that was number 1 on our district leader list. And I know it was important for many of you that are here with us today too, that idea of student learning loss, recovery, acceleration. So we have very specific questions on the Speak Up survey this year about parents' concerns about this. What does that mean in terms of parents' concerns? And how is that relatively important to parents? We also are asking specific questions about students' preferences for different types of learning models. A very interesting key finding from the Speak Up research last year was that for a fair amount of students that had virtual learning experiences, they actually felt that was a very positive experience for them. I know that some of the media reports may be different, and it may be different in your community as well. But for many of those students, they actually felt that was an effective learning experience for them. And it's important to understand why, particularly as you think about addressing the learning loss or the acceleration needs. And then also this idea of what do principals think about how pandemic funds should be used to address learning loss. I'm sure that you're collecting that information from your principals, either anecdotally or maybe in a systemic way, but how interesting to look at what your principals are saying compared to principals statewide or nationwide. In terms of staff morale and motivation, and I know this was something that came up in our little polling as well, it's really important to take a look at a couple different things here, and the Speak Up questions reflect this. So by using the Speak Up surveys, the types of things you're going to learn about staff morale and motivation may include these. And again, I'm just giving you a small sampling here. What is the level of principals' concern about their current teachers, particularly around their own morale or their motivation around the adoption of new learning models? How comfortable are teachers with these new learning models? What do teachers say are their professional development needs? And what do they say are the most effective or preferred modalities for that? Relative to the mental and emotional health supports and needs, Speak Up can help you in very significant ways around this. By collecting feedback from your audiences around social emotional learning, the benefits and challenges of social emotional learning program implementations. How do parents want their child's school to address social emotional learning? Do they want their child's school to address this? And also then, are our kids okay? So we ask a number of what we would call school climate questions, asking students about whether or not there is a trusting adult that they can talk to, whether or not they believe that their school cares about them, whether or not they feel engaged in everyday learning. This idea of the effectiveness of technology is one that actually is at the heart of the Speak Up surveys and the questions that we address as well. So we asked the different audiences about the benefits and outcomes of technology when it is used effectively, both in terms of supporting teachers' instructional practice as well as student learning. We also asked teachers their frequency of using different types of digital tools, and many school and district leaders tell us that that's a really important part of this puzzle as well, to really understand if what their expectations are about usage is actually the reality in classrooms. And then finally, the final one that I wanted to highlight for you is around these funding priorities. So we have a new set of questions on the Speak Up surveys this year that really get to some of those questions around the idea of what should be the priorities for the pandemic funds? How are they currently being used? What's the most effective way to engage the community, either in terms of having a voice in those decisions or communicating back out about those funding priorities? Of course, you're getting feedback from your different stakeholders already. But again, going back to that, are we just listening to the squeaky wheels or the folks that have our leaders' phone numbers memorized? Or are we really effectively engaging our entire community and making sure that they're being part of the process as well? So again, when we think about the value of Speak Up and helping you translate stakeholder views and values into actionable knowledge, it's really about using trusted data, having some context around that data, and using it to move forward, to really create a new culture of engagement with your community members. Now, here's my recommendations for next steps. One is I always tell school and district leaders when I'm working with them, I like to start with the idea of identifying what types of information or data do you need from your stakeholders to inform your planning and decisions right now, and also for the longer term. So think about the fact that the Speak Up surveys are open for any school or district to use right now through the end of April. You have the opportunity to collect feedback from your stakeholders and still use that feedback from your stakeholders to impact your plans conceptually for the rest of this school year, particularly maybe around budgeting, or for summer learning plans, and definitely for next school year. So the opportunity exists to use this data effective immediately as well as in the long term, but it starts with you. You need to start thinking about what types of information would be most valuable to you. So I like to start with a list. Then let's talk. We are always happy, the team is here with me, I'm going to introduce everyone in a moment, to schedule a call, Zoom meeting, tell us what your needs are, and we'll talk to you about whether or not Speak Up could help you in that way, or how we can leverage some of our other assets to support your efforts. So let's get into a conversation about it. And then I also encourage school and district leaders to build some momentum within your district by inviting other members of the cabinet, other members of your staff, other members of your district community to be part of this planning process with us. The Speak Up tools can be so powerful if used appropriately. We want to make sure that you have all the assets that you need to be able to inform your planning, your decision-making, and your communication back out with your community. Now, there's lots of other resources that exist on tomorrow.org. That's our home website. We have our national report that we released earlier this year, which focused in on equity. Please take a look at that. We think that's really valuable. We also did a congressional briefing, as we do every year, around the Speak Up results, and you can watch that video as well. We had 4 fabulous students from around the country who gave us their authentic feedback in real time. I also should have put up here on the screen, I know that Marlo, who is with us, was interested in cybersecurity. We released a new cybersecurity report last Friday on the state of cybersecurity in K-12 education. You can also reference that on our website, as well as learning more information about Speak Up as well. So come visit us at tomorrow.org to learn more. Pilar Comparan, who is our education program manager, just put her email address in the chat box. Happy to discuss more about Speak Up with anyone that is interested. And please feel free to reach out to Pilar or to myself as to be able to help you with your efforts. Now, before we open this up to your questions, your comments, your ideas, maybe some suggestions you have for us as well, I thought what I would do is share what a former executive director of education technology, our good friend Ann McMullen, who spent many years with the Klein Independent School District in Texas, what she says about the value of a school or district or system participating in Speak Up.
First of all, the fact that you reach so many different audiences. You know, it isn't just student data, or it isn't just parent data, or it isn't just administrator or teacher data. It's everyone. And in education, we serve a broad spectrum, and we have a broad spectrum of people who have to work and have to lead that initiative. So I can't think of anything that would be more critical in strategic planning for a district, you know, and as you're looking to plan not just the next 6 months, but the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years. Where are we? Where do we need to go? And then where is our state? And where does it need to go? And where are we compared nationally? And where are things moving? And at a time when things have changed so rapidly in so many places, I think it's an opportunity, Julie, really to not be reactive, but to be proactive in what you're doing. You know, look at the current reality for the world, for your state, for your city, and then look at the reality in your own district. And this is what the data has told you. And the miracle, one of the many that you do so well, Julie, with Speak Up, is that it really doesn't take people that long to take the survey. But the volume of information that you get back is just amazing and really so informative. And it's not biased, you know, this is what this person thinks, this is what this other person thinks, you know, and you've got this accumulating together, you know, to come together to do that.
So just a little bit of a snippet here from Anne. As a former executive director of education technology, about what she says is the value of participating in Speak Up. There's lots of examples that we can provide from other school and district leaders about why they participate every year in the Speak Up research project, and we're happy to engage with you and share with you some of those other perspectives as well. So what I'm going to do now is let's just open it up in terms of if you have any sort of questions or comments or ideas or things that you need some clarification on. We are happy to engage with that. Mr. Warren, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I've got a confession. Is that okay?
I guess if you want this to be a confession.
Yes, I think so. We kind of fell off the radar for Speak Up for the last couple of years because our bandwidth was impacted so profoundly. And I'm sure there's others can probably have a similar. I think I got myself a therapist. I think that's what happened as a result of all this. But anyway, this year we're beginning to get back to breathing again. Even though our initial response from teachers is this is the most difficult year so far. I think last year was the most difficult year for me as an administrator, but this year for the teachers, I think it's just fatigue set in. But we really do want to get back in the game. For what about districts that have been part of Speak Up that got hit with, and we're a smaller district than most, so we don't have, we wear multiple hats, and extra weight makes lifting things that were easy to lift a little harder to lift. What about districts like ours that were in and now want to get back in? Is any words of encouragement for districts like ours?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple key points there, Glenn. Thank you for that. We know that there is more work out there today. Our school and district leaders are addressing all kinds of new challenges that maybe you never had before. That's why we're seeing districts are either re-engaging with us around Speak Up, as Glenn is talking about, or finding Speak Up as a way to relieve some of that stress. So we know that there's an imperative to understand what are the views of your stakeholders. So what do teachers say they need about professional development? What are the concerns that parents have about technology use in school? Is it all about too much screen time, or are there other issues associated with that? What do students think about their preferences for communications with their teachers, as an example of just a couple things? So to relieve some of the stress and some of the burden that you already have from a workload standpoint, using the Speak Up survey actually helps you. So rather than sitting down and developing your own survey, which may or may not have valid questions, or going out and hiring an organization to do that for you and using your instructional funds, your precious instructional funds, to pay someone to do a survey for you, you can use the Speak Up surveys to be able to both relieve you of some work burden, as well as to make sure that the data you have is trusted and valid. So I think it can help you in those areas. For districts that had participated with us in the past, please know that there are a lot of questions on the Speak Up survey that are similar or not, or may even be the same as when you participated the last time. So how interesting to be able to have that comparative data. How interesting to go back 3 years and say, and be able to say, okay, so here's what our teachers were saying 3 years ago before the pandemic on the Speak Up surveys. And now we have the same question, for example, about professional development needs on this year's survey. How has that changed over time? Well, you have the opportunity through the Speak Up process to look at that comparative data. And our staff can help you in terms of pulling that older data to be able to take a look at it. If you haven't participated with us in the past, what better way to get started than with this current year data, and then use that from a longitudinal standpoint to see the shift, to see the transformation, to see the changes that are happening in real time. So I think that there's several different things to do. If you had participated with us, I think there's a couple districts here that are with us today that have in the past and would like to get re-engaged. We're happy to do, once again, a one-on-one conversation with you about what has changed with Speak Up, what some of the new tools are, what those new questions look like, and then also how to access your former data from the past so that you have that longitudinal database there, which I think would be really interesting for folks from a planning standpoint, from an understanding of what's new, what's not only what's new, but where to go from here. Did you have another point, Clint?
Yeah, just I thought another thing that might be helpful, it occurred to me as you were speaking, you know, because of new funding, I know it's true in California, it might be true elsewhere across the country, in an attempt to catch students up, at least the perception of needing to catch students up. You know, many of us, including our district, have implemented MTSS TOSAs at our, otherwise known as teachers on special assignment, for those who don't know what TOSA means, but you know, this is the kind of data that would be helpful to their work. So it might be interesting to have a one-on-one with bringing all our site-based TOSAs together that are there helping catch kids up and use Speak Up as a means to further their work and understanding not only academically, but also social, emotionally, behaviorally, what are the dispositions of the parents, of the students, of the teachers, of whom they need to collaborate to do their work. So this might be an interesting place for that to sit. So yeah, I think we'd be very interested in maybe having a kind of a site-based, all of our schools, their representatives, with you guys, catch them up on what the benefit is having that being implemented, so that when it goes out there, it gets a higher degree of visibility when it's being used. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. That was helpful. It sparked an idea.
Good, thank you, Gwen. I think that, you know, one of the key things that I always say, many of you may have heard me say this before, collecting data is only one part of the process, right? The real more important part, the more important part of the work is leveraging that data. So understanding first, is the data valid? Is it something that we can trust from our decision making? But then actually getting to the action part. And one of the things that we've been doing increasingly with school and district leaders is helping with that translation process. So for many states, I run a workshop in terms of how to interpret your Speak Up data to understand what that means for your decision making. And so I'm always happy to do that for a district, for a state, whatever makes sense. It's really about, excuse me, developing your own professional capacities to understand how data can impact decision making. The second thing that I wanted to say, really sparked by something that Glenn shared with us just now, is, again, we have the tools that are available for you to use. 100% free. You make the decision how you use them. So again, there is nothing that says if you participate in Speak Up that you have to poll your parents, that you have to poll your teachers, you have to poll your students, you have to poll your administrators. You decide. You also can decide which schools you want to use the Speak Up surveys with. So we have some districts that have identified on a regular basis the idea of certain schools being polled in year 1, certain schools using Speak Up in year 2, maybe in year 3, it's a different set of schools. Or folks will say, these are the schools that we are most interested in the feedback from our teachers, for whatever reasons that might be. There's many different ways to set it up, and we can also give you recommendations. We can share with you what other schools and districts have done around this, but it's important for it to be meaningful for you. So as much as we can help customize Speak Up to be meaningful for you, then that would be something that is important, not only for your process, but for our process. So a question came in here. Let me address this question from Steve. Is there any national comparative of non-aggregated data from the surveys that we can see to compare ourselves against other schools? There are many different ways that we can disaggregate the data. So at a national level, because the back end of our database is the NCES database, we can disaggregate the data based on any of the modifiers within that. So we look at every year, we look at urban schools versus suburban schools versus rural schools. We look at Title I schools versus non-Title I schools. We look at schools based on student population, schools where the majority of students are students of color versus schools where the majority of those students are students that are white. We look at all of these different things. We look at based on district size, on school size. We can look at the data across looking at other comparative data, teachers' years of experience, for example, parents' education levels, all sorts of different ways we can disaggregate the data. We also can do some of that comparative for you as well. So for example, if you are in a rural district and you want to be able to have a comparative against other rural districts, maybe of the same size, we can disaggregate that data and compare your data against that as well. So there are definitely ways to do different types of comparisons. Step 1 again is participating in Speak Up, so we have the data to do the disaggregation for you. But there is some different types of national comparatives that we can do. So Steve, I hope I answered that question. There's a lot probably that I can go into more detail on that, but I hope that I gave you at least a taste, and we'd be happy to talk more about that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, this often comes up in conversations like this, is people will say, well, you know, we don't have time to do Speak Up, or it's going to take too much time. Please, folks, please realize there is very little time involved in this. We provide everything to you in terms of promoting out the surveys to your stakeholders. So let's say, for example, if I was a district CIO, CTO, or a director of technology or a director of education services, and I wanted to find out, for example, what my teachers thought about the value of technology, particularly in terms of the outcomes to students and the outcomes to themselves in terms of instructional practice. And the reason that might be interesting for me is I wanted to find out if my teachers were on the same page as our district vision about the power of technology to transform teaching and learning. I could make a decision then to have the Speak Up surveys completed by my teachers. The surveys take about 14 minutes to complete. All you would need to do is promote a link to your teachers and have them complete the survey. That's all you have to do. The back end processing of all of that is done by Project Tomorrow. We then provide you with a report that documents all of the findings, both the quantitative as well as the open-ended comments from your teachers, in a report that you can then review and analyze. The time requirement here, again, from the teachers will be about 14 minutes. From your work standpoint, it's just a matter of communicating out to the teachers the link to that teacher survey, and also the reason, I always recommend this, the reason that you are interested in their viewpoints on this. I will often tell school and district leaders the best way to get engagement from your stakeholders, be it the parents in your community, the teachers, your school administrators, whoever that might be in terms of supporting Speak Up, is to give them the reason why. We all need to understand why. So in my little example here, if you were interested in maybe developing some new professional learning experiences for teachers and you wanted to make sure those were in alignment with what your teachers needed, tell the teachers that. Tell them that the reason you're asking them to take 14 minutes of their precious time to complete this survey is so that you can better address their needs from a professional learning standpoint. Again, our team is here to help you with those why conversations so that you understand what that means going forward and how you can leverage that. I hope this has been helpful here today, folks. I really didn't want to take too much of your time. Once again, Pilar, will you put your email address, please, in the chat so that folks know how to reference you as well, if they want some further information. We're happy to do some follow-up calls. We're scheduling stuff right now in January, so happy to do that, and would love the opportunity to work with you in terms of helping you with your planning, with your decision-making, and also with your communications out to your community. Any further questions or thoughts? The Project Tomorrow team here will stick around for a little bit longer if you want to do a little bit more of a sidebar conversation. In the meantime, Pilar will be following up with everybody with this recording and also some additional information that we have for you about Speak Up. So thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope that this has been helpful and productive, and I hope that you all have a wonderful winter break. And here's to good news and good wishes for 2022. Thanks so much, folks.